All right, let's take it to news on the go closer to home. The South African Revenue Service, that's SARS, is currently holding a memorial service to pay tribute to the life and legacy of former Commissioner Pravin Gordhan, who obviously passed away earlier this week at the age of 75. Currently giving his tribute is former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel. Let's listen in.
And that was the inner core of activism that defined the Pravin I knew. You see, there were things he knew he wouldn't be good at. He could leave the drafting of the tax law amendments to Kwesi and them, and he could leave the human capital arrangements to other people. And his job as head of the organization was to provide vision and to synthesize the various forces into a common whole. And that was the unique strength that Pravin presented. And he was driven by that energy and will and his own moral force. Whether it was about joining the dots or whether it was about tackling corruption, whether it was all about doing what was necessary to drive the change. Now, as we all know, when Jill Marcus and I first approached Pravin, he was reluctant. Pravin was the reluctant commissioner. And that was an important starting point because it allowed him to get on with the job, checking out his ego at the door and allowing him to get on with the job. And it allowed him to understand the centrality of transformation for the journey, because the journey was towards a democracy that touches the lives of everyday people. And some of those milestones were firstly the systematic and systemic change in the Revenue Service. It was the merger of two discrete departments, Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise. It was about ensuring that there were the right people while dealing sensitively with the people who no longer had the skills for the new organization. It was about getting systems in place, because you had to move from a paper-based system to a digitalized revenue service. It was about innovating on some things like pre-inspections for customs and e-filing and the modernization. But there was also, very importantly, how people were convened with the pride of delivery. You know, many of the memorable days in the tax year were those overnighters from the 31st of March to the 1st of April. Pre-announced targets. And one of the pictures in the slideshow is PG and I each having a cricket shirt that says 493 not out, because that was the target. And if you can set the targets and mobilize all of your people, everybody shares in the pride of achievement, and that was a very important feature of the leadership of PG at SARS. And then there was a massive institutional change. I mean, I come here to Legaile SARS and I think, well, it's almost unthinkable of those little offices in Proust Street. There are some old-timers here, you can hear by the laughter, where on the one side, Trevor van Heerden and his crew sat, and on the other side, Koleski and his crew. And the institutional change from there to where SARS is today has been no mean feat. It's a very significant driven change that was possible by vision and by mobilizing a whole range of skills from people who otherwise would not have considered a life in the Revenue Service. And I can run through, and whether you're talking of the Commissioner Ed Kisvetter here, or Barry and Brenda Hoare, or I can look for names and I'll see all of you. The light is in my eyes, so forgive me. But people who would not have considered for themselves a career in SARS came along and made the change. And then there were other aspects that became important. You see, one of the hallmarks of this activism was curiosity. This is one issue I'd like to touch on in respect of curiosity. We were looking at some aspects of what was happening. On the south coast of the Western Cape, abalone was being fished out. It wasn't eaten in South Africa, it got out of the country. And how did that happen? And we then needed to establish a team who could help us understand how the abalone got out. And as we understood how the abalone got out, we understood how drugs got in. We understood how counterfeit got in. And we needed to get better at that. Ivan and van Locherenberg and those people then said, what we need is to deal with this problem. Because it also pointed to other things. It pointed to counterfeit and money laundering. It pointed to all manner of issues. And what PG led an understanding of is we must be able to triangulate information. If we understand what happens to the money, who's bought what car with what resources, who's purchased property with what resources, what are the bank accounts showing? If you have that kind of information, then you can deal with a tax system that is perceived to be fair, and that quality of leadership is something that we need to take very seriously. And it was that curiosity that gave rise to special investigations. But as special investigations proceeded, it brought SARS in direct conflict with the criminal networks. And the criminal networks then needed to do other things, including fake intelligence. And so the idea of a rogue intelligence unit was born. But what they described as a rogue intelligence unit was merely SARS extending its work and saying, if we want people to pay tax, there must be a sense of fairness about taxation. And that, in many ways, was the beginning of the onslaught against Pravin. The beginning of the endeavor to dismantle the revenue service. The beginning of the breaking of friendships. I saw a certain man whose name I forget at the funeral in KZN the other day. He said, you know, he was my comrade. He gave me money to get to Swaziland. I don't know what went wrong. I forget his name, but it's not important. Because what this work did was to set up what I can only describe as a clash of civilizations. It was such a strong clash of values. Values between theft and democracy. Value about benefit for some and democracy for all, that created all the difficulty that Pravin, Vani, Anisha and Priyesha and the extended family lived through. But that was the issue. Fundamentally important, and Pravin didn't ever equivocate on these issues. He set out saying, let's join the dots as we are doing this morning. We can join the dots and see what the issues were. That quote that I read from Gramsci ends with, whatever the situation, I imagine the worst that could happen in order to summon up all my reserves and willpower to overcome every obstacle. Summon up all my reserves and willpower to overcome every obstacle. And that is the story of a life. The life of a commissioner and a minister, but more importantly, the life of an activist whose commitment to democracy didn't ever waver. And so my plea this morning is that in PG's honor, that SARS must be rebuilt to the level it had attained under his leadership, rebuild with vigor and determination. It's never too late to envision and create the democracy that was dreamed of and felt in those very lonely nights in solitary confinement by Pravin and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Welcome to our colleagues online. Our colleagues in the regions are also connected here. Welcome to them on this program. Minister Manuel touches on two aspects, activism and targets. So in understanding that we would have to grow the tax base, and those in the 80s, 70s who are advocating for boycotting the system have to be used to get small businesses, especially from previously disadvantaged communities, to be tax compliant. Thus, he announces a small business tax amnesty in February, normally on the budget speech. Because SARS is pumping and busy, this gets forgotten until on the eve of the midterm budget speech, which happens in October. In August, I get a call. Now, the hallmark of Minister Manuel and Pravin, their phones, you can't recognize them. You can't use Truecaller. So when it comes, you either know it's PG or it's a minister, between the two. You also had to learn that the business day has been read before 7 a.m. If you have not, you are in trouble. When you arrive here, PG will say, have you seen what's in the paper? The minister will call and say, what? I nearly sweat. Okay, I'm sorry. So you had to learn.
All right, so live visuals there coming out of the SARS headquarters in Pretoria. The memorial service, really, one of several for the late Minister Pravin Gordhan, well underway. We've heard so far from former Minister Trevor Manuel, who's spoken at a number of similar events where he's really lauded the kind of work that Pravin Gordhan has been able to do at his time at SARS and subsequently in other key strategic roles within government. Today's memorial service comes after a similar event was held by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation yesterday in the Johannesburg City Hall. That's where we heard the ANC's ANC Veterans League President Snuki Zikalala saying that the party is facing an existential crisis. He's calling for renewal in honor of the late struggle veteran. We'll certainly keep listening into some of those tributes as they continue pouring in from SARS's head offices in Pretoria.